Hello everybody, welcome to this 12-bar blues study. In this video, you're going to get a recording of the actual study, plus a measure-by-measure lesson for both the guitar and the bass. In the description of this video, you can purchase a PDF for the inexpensive price of $5 for the actual study written out, and so you can follow along in the lessons that I give in this video. Have fun, let me know how I can help. My email is bobby@thehallsofmusic.com. Thanks. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's take a look at measure 1. We're using the E shape of C. That E shape looks like an E major, but barring the 8th fret to make this melody. If you look in the document, I have the left-hand fingering written in below the notes, so you can see what I'm using there, as well as here in the video, it's showing you very plainly. And that chord that we play here, we're using the arpeggio C, E, G, to make this lick, and we're using an A as a passing tone, which is actually pretty consonant. You could make a 13 chord out of it, and it just comes in on beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So it's just that coming in on beat 1 to make it simple. My right hand technique that I'm using is all downstrokes through the arpeggio, and then I use an upstroke on the A, and then I come back with a downstroke to the E, mostly because I spent some time studying gypsy jazz, and they use a lot of downstrokes to emphasize notes. Makes it stronger sounding. Okay, so taking a look at measure 2, the chord that's actually being played there is an F dominant 7, or that chord at the 10th fret, but the way that we're constructing the melody is out of the A shape of F. So it looks like an A major chord, and the F is on the 8th fret. We got that A shape of F right there for this melody, where it clearly comes back and resolves to that F. This particular lick comes in on the and of 4, so there's a pickup in measure 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. And so we have that little pickup. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. And just comes back and resolves to an F there on beat 3. Very clearly an F major lick. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. 2, and 3, 4. All right. Okay, so measure 3 is exactly like measure 1. We're not going to reanalyze that again. So if measure 3, same thing as measure 1. Measure 4, we have a pickup note again on the and of 4, measure 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. Right? We go from E flat to E natural, which is a part of the C major arpeggio. And in that fourth measure, we're implying a C dominant 7 chord. So it has a B flat in it. So that melody ends on that B flat to create that dominant 7 tension that sounds like it's going to resolve. So we have that resolution sound from the B flat to the A to go to the F, which is in measure 5. So that melody, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, ends on the and of 2, which is a nice syncopated place to end a melody, and it ends on that very poignant B flat to create tension so that we can move harmonically to the F chord, because C dominant 7 is the 5 of F. And we can hear it sort of resolving to that F. That's what the melody's doing here. All right, so here we are in measure 5. We've gone from our C dominant 7 resolving to F. And in this melody is starting on beat 1 with an A, which is a chord tone, and a C is used, which is a chord tone. That's the melody. And it ends on that D, which you could add that D to the chord, and it sounds fine. For those of you who know theory, that's a 6 chord, or a 6 scale degree, or a 13. So we have a major 13 here. Very consonant, solid sounding melodic content. And it comes in on beat 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and again, we're ending on the and of 3, same basic motive that we did in measure 1, except I'm making that D staccato. Instead of, I think the staccato for now sounds pretty cool. All right, so that's measure 5. What makes this melody complicated from 6 to 7 is the rhythm mostly. So it comes in on the and of 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2. And ends on the and of 4 in measure 7, resolving to measure 7. The and of 4 of measure 6, resolving to measure 7. So if you played it straight, you could play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. You could do that practicing and it would be fine, really. If you absolutely cannot get the ands of 4 when you're practicing, that's fine. And just play it on the beats and that will work just fine. Now, the way that we're hearing this melody is ba-da, ba-da, ba. So we're going from F, ba-da, ba-da, ba, resolving to C now. Okay, now the difference in the harmony we have in measure 6, we have an F sharp diminished. Ba-da, ba-da, ba. It sounds fine whether you play the F sharp diminished here or here. Ba-da, ba-da, ba. The F to C harmony right there is so strong, my ear accepts it. So we have some syncopation here, and the chords are actually pretty interesting, but the melody is just pentatonic scale. So instead of playing the G right here on the 12th fret from that typical pentatonic box, we're playing the G right here on the 8th fret of the 2nd string. So it's all pentatonic. That's partially what makes it so easy to accept with our ear. Okay, so measure 7 does not actually have a lick in it that dominates measure 7. Was sort of a measure of rest, because we have a pickup from measure 7 to measure 8 where there's a lick in measure 8 that actually, revolves around the harmony with measure 8. So we're coming in on the and of 3 in measure 7, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and resolving down to that C sharp, and then it's 2 and to finish the lick, which is also part of the an A major arpeggio. A, C sharp, E is the A major arpeggio, and we're using E and G from the C major arpeggio in measure 7. So we're going ba 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 da 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 da, right? And so 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and that's the lick. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and we're outlining A major in measure 8, and we're going from C. Da, 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 da. And you know, A major is what we're outlining, but there is a dominant 7 sound there. So we're adding a G natural or a flat 7 to that chord in measure 8 to give it a dominant sound. All right, that's the lick for measure 8 and the A dominant 7 chord. All right, so measure 9 is D minor. The D minor 7 sound has this C in it, so it kind of breaks up the chord a little bit. Doesn't sound as clear as a D minor chord. But if you play that lick in measure 9 just from beat 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's the same motive that we have from the first measure of the piece. 1 and 2 and 3 and it's clearly D minor. But to make things a little more interesting, I came up with a pickup note that starts in measure 8, leading to measure 9, that outlines 2 notes from the A dominant 7 chord, or A major chord, same difference, C sharp and E, as a pickup to measure 9. So the actual lick starts on the and of 3 in measure 8. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and... So let's hear that again. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and... So you could practice it without the pickup at first, if you need to, and then go back and add to get it, you know. And with the right hand, I'm still just using a lot of down ups to get everything. Nothing really too difficult there. All right, at this point in the form, with measure 10 going to measure 11, we have to hear it going from G back to C here. Or if we did it at the 8th fret. Okay. Now in measure 10, we have a pickup from measure 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. And that B flat to B right there is part of that C shape of G. Yep, right there. So we hear that lick in measure 10 getting up to that G, all part of a G chord. And then when we hear the last half of it, we hear it walking down and resolving down to our C. So we hear da 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 da. Right hand just doing some down ups. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and that ends on the and of 4 from measure 10, resolving over to measure 11. I like doing that for studies like this because it makes it just slightly more interesting. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and we're in C. All right, so the lick in measure 11 can be practiced 2 ways. One way, you can just come in on beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and... That's going to be fine if you want to practice it that way. The lick literally, so it sounds like this if I'm not counting over it. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's fine to practice it that way if you need to outside of the context of the melody. Now, the way it literally is played in the way I played it in the melody, it comes off on the and of 4. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1. So it sounds a little longer on the and of 4. So like this, 1, 2, and 3, and 4. It's got that little syncopated sort of sound that is nice for the rhythm. Now harmonically here, we really could just look at this as all as a C kind of sound. Even with the B flat in there, it could be a C dominant 7 sound. Now the reason I included that B flat is because we do have a C, they would call a C sharp diminished a lot of times, but I prefer to call this an A7 flat 9 over C sharp, even though A is not in the chord, because it's actually resolving to D minor in measure 12. But that chord consists of C sharp, G, B flat, and E. So that B flat can be a part of a C sharp diminished, or you could call it I call it A dominant 7 over C sharp. So the B flat is there. It's the flat 9 of that chord. So the melody has a little bit of tension in it. And then we're going to go into measure 12. All right, let's get to 12. Okay, so to really hear what the melody is communicating in measure 12, let's take a listen to the harmonies of 11 and 12. So we have C, and we're ending right there on that G chord. So we have a sound of G in the measure 12 that's really important, because when we get back to the top of the form, we're going back to C at the top of the form, or measure 1. So we hear this melody obviously walking down to a G. It does not take into account that we have a D minor in the first half, D minor in the first half of the measure. I'm just walking down from C down to G. And that first pickup, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, is actually going from a C down to a B that is a part of a G chord. But it just slides right through it pretty quickly, so you don't really get to hear it that way. And we are emphasizing the G by coming down on what note? A G note. That's right. And so we go from back to the top of the form. Right? So yeah, all right, we got a melody that really outlines G. All right, so let's look at measures 13 through 16. We have repeating. So we have this pickup, which is an E and a C sharp, going to the D minor at the end of end of measure 14, even though there's not an A dominant 7 there, because it highlights the D minor sound. So, and I've left out one of the notes from the original pickup. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, like that. So, it's basically repeated material from the rest of the piece. It's a tag. It's meant to be repetitive to sort of signal that the ending's coming. I will admit, I don't think this is the strongest ending I've ever composed in my life, but this study is just meant to be a study. It's meant to be fun to play, and we're getting to the end, and that's great because we got to move on to the bass here pretty soon. All right, so we're going to look at the final little melodic content here from measure 16 all the way to the end of the piece, or measure 18. We got a pickup in measure 16, starts on the and of 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, down to the downbeat of measure 17. And then in measure 17, we got 17 through 18. A little bluesy sounding lick right there at the end, just to have a little sauce right there at the end, okay? So rhythmically, we've got this going. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. So the last note ends on the and of 2. So right? And it's just it's kind of a weak ending, but at least it does end, relatively with some signaling. But that's it. That's all of the melodic content for the guitar. Now let's take a look at the bass. Quick disclaimer about the bass parts you're about to explore. the chords that are implied are written above every measure. So we're going to be doing a lot of arpeggios using chord tones 1, 3, and 5 through this whole study. If you want to know what chords you're playing, look at the label on the top of the measure and it'll show you which chord is being implied by the notes you're playing. All right, so with the bass, you're going to have to ignore the 5th string here. I'm playing a 5 string. All of these notes are written for a 4-string bass for beginners. Let's go through measures 1 through 5 basically. So I'm just going to very quickly explain. In every single chord instance, we're just using the root, the 3rd scale degree, and the 5th scale degree. So that creates the arpeggio for every single chord just about. All right. So in measure 1, we have a C major arpeggio, C, E, G, E. Then measure 2, F major, F, A, C, A. Measure 3, back to C, C, E, G, E. Then in measure 4, we're outlining the dominant harmony, what's called a C dominant 7 with a B flat. Walking down to this E that eventually resolves right in measure 5 to that F. So we hear this line walking down and resolving to the F. That resolution brings us into measure 5, which is an F major chord. But I'm gonna, in the next little segment, I will explain measures 5, basically 5 through 9. All right, here we go. All right, so let's look at measures 5 through 9. So we heard measure 4 coming down, resolving to F. F. That resolves very clearly to F. And in measure 5, we have an F major arpeggio, F, A, C, A. Measure 6 is an F sharp diminished arpeggio, F sharp, A, C, A to C. So we hear. And that resolution to 7 just sounds right in my ear. We have it to C. So we have a C major arpeggio in 7, C, E, G, E again. And then in measure 8, we're going to an A dominant 7 sound with an A major arpeggio, A, C sharp, E, C sharp. So let's hear 7 and 8. And that last C sharp of measure 8 resolves down to the D of measure 9. So let's hear that. We can really hear that resolution. In each of these instances, we're creating conflict resolution with the harmony. And it's all written in your score with the chords that are implied over each measure. So be sure to pay attention to that. All right, so now let's do measures 9 through, actually it's 9 through going back to the top of the form to measure 1, because we have a repeat at the end of measure 12 that goes back to the top of the form. So we've already seen from measure 5 to, measure 8 to measure 9, we have A resolving to D minor. In that measure 9, we have a D minor arpeggio, D, F, A, F. And then in measure 10, we have this walk down that's a part of a G dominant 7 sound. So we're going from G back to C, or G, C. But we're walking down in measure 10, G, F, E, D, C. So we hear this movement of resolving to the C chord at the downbeat of measure 11 is really important. So let's hear that 9, 10 to the downbeat of 11. D minor to G to C. All right, so in measure 11, going back to measure 1, we have a lot of harmonic movement. We're going from C. We don't have time to get the G because we go straight from C to what looks like a C sharp diminished arpeggio. That's actually an A dominant 7 over C sharp, because you're resolving in measure 12 to that D. So it sounds, and that's a D minor. We have a D, F of D minor, and then the G chord in measure 12, we're going to hit a G, and then we're going to hit a D back to C in measure 1. So we hear this in measure 11, 12, back to measure 1. And that harmonic movement is really fast. We're moving through chords really fast right there, every 2 beats. So, but the main thing is moving back to C. So it's interesting when we hear this 9 through measure 1, we're going to go back to C in measure 11 and then go, nope, 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 nope. Measure 11 and 12, we're going to do a lot more harmonic things and then get back to C to measure 1. So let's hear that. Measure 8 with the A, going to measure 9 to D minor to G, to C, to A dominant 7, to D minor, to G, back to C at measure 1. Here we go. In measure 8, 1, 2, 3, 4. Resolving here. Walking down to C. Right, and I think it's very obvious how the harmonic movement here works. You can hear it working, and it's just really functional. So partially what makes the blues form really fun to play, because there's a lot of harmonic tricks that just work. All right, so in the tag, if you just played measures 13, 14, 15 to the downbeat of 16, you'd really hear D minor to G, D minor to G. And the last note of measure 14 is a C sharp. There's not an A dominant 7 chord there, really, but it implies it so that we hear it going back to D minor, so we can get that D minor to G, D minor to G sound. Here we go, 13 to the downbeat of 16. You can really hear it. I'll do it again. Da, 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 da. Hear that resolving. Good. Now that's pretty much the tag of this 13 to 16. All right, so we've done the tag, we've repeated D minor to G, and then we get to measure 16, it ends on the G, and we hear that 16 simply walking back down to C. Or, right? That is so obvious that it's going to that C and landing there, okay? So we're basically going G to C, to a C major arpeggio, and then we're doubling with the guitar in measure 18. We're doing E flat to D, C as the ending. So it's kind of a weak ending, but at least it does end with some certainty. Right? Let's hear that again. Okay, so that gives us 16 to 18. Now let's listen to all of 13 to the end, just to get a real sense of how this ending is supposed to go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, again, 13 through the end. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that's it. I hope you have fun and learn something. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.